Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video, we'll go over the progress we've made in our new golf game. We'll be guiding you through the development process from scratch. Before we start creating maps, let's create a tileset resource. We're going to right click on the folder where our tile image is, go to New and select Resource. Select Tileset and let's just call it Tileset. With our tileset selected, we drag our sprite sheet onto it. It automatically creates tiles from our image, however, Godot assumes that the dimensions are 16 by 16, which is wrong in our case. Let's quickly change the tile size to 32 by 32 to match the tile sheet. Now, let's define which of these tiles are solid objects. Still having the tile set selected, let's go to the physics layer and press Add Element. You can think of physics layers as collision layers. Next, we go to Select and give each tile a collision shape. We're going to do this to every tile except for this little green tile which represents grass. That's the only tile where the ball can move. Okay, now let's make some maps. To be more organized, we're going to create a maps folder. Right click on the folder, create a scene, make sure it's a 2D scene, and let's call it test map. In our test map scene, we're adding a tile map node. From here, we quick load the tile set we made and start laying down tiles. This is just a test map where we are going to experiment with basic gameplay, so it will be a small island without any extra obstacles. With the play area complete, we need our space background. Same as our tile set, we create a new resource, select tile set, and call it space tile set. We import our space tile sheet and tell Godot not to generate tiles from it since we're going to animate this. And also, we need to adjust the tile size to 32 by 32 again. Now we need to animate this tile. We select the first tile and go to Animation. Set the columns to 8 since we have 8 frames. Then we go to Frames and click on Add Element until each tile is highlighted. Notice how the UI marks animation frames with a green border. With our new tiles created, let's create a new tile map node on our test map and start laying down tiles. Drag it across the canvas and... uh-oh. Anyway, this is a quick fix. By the way, we renamed the node to background so it's less confusing. Select the node, go to layers and set the Z index to -1. Okay, we have our first map. Now let's create some game objects and basic gameplay.
Now that we have some terrain, let's start working on the ball. I'm going to start with the sprite first. Nothing fancy here, just a small 6x6 pixel sprite that just about resembles a ball. Now we go back to Godot and create a new 2D scene for our ball. We add a sprite 2D node and assign an image. Let's zoom in to get a better view. Add a collision shape 2D, but make sure it's a child of the ball, not the sprite, and set the shape to circle. And shrink it down to match the size of the sprite. Notice how the ball is pretty ugly. We can fix this by setting the texture filtering property to nearest. This will give the ball that sharp, pixel-perfect look that we're looking for. We should also change the node type of our ball to be Rigid Body 2D. Rigid bodies are used for objects that are moved by the game's physics engine as opposed to scripts. You'll see later. One physics property that we don't want is gravity. We can disable gravity for the ball by setting the gravity scale property on the rigid body to 0. Because we're making a game with a top-down perspective, it makes no sense to have gravity here. Now we can add the ball to our scene. I'll place it in the middle of the grass. Now I'm going to add a script to the root node of our test scene. There's a couple of things going on here. At the top of our script we have two mouse related variables. One to track if the left mouse button is pressed and the other for the position of the cursor. Then we have an underscore input method. This is a built-in method similar to ready in process. It runs every time the game detects an input event. Here we do two things. We set is mouse down to true if the left mouse button has just been pressed, or false if it's just been released. Then, if the left mouse button is pressed and the mouse is moving, we assign coordinates to mouse position. Otherwise, if the condition is false, we set the position to null. Then, at the end, we call QRedraw. This method invokes the underscore draw method, which I'll explain next. Then finally, we have the underscore draw method. This is another built-in method that allows you to draw any arbitrary 2D shape on the screen. In our case, if the mouse position is not null, we draw a yellow line from the ball to where the mouse cursor is. And it looks something like this. However, notice that the line appears between the terrain and the background. Let's fix this. We can set the z-index of both tilemap nodes to -1. That way, the line will naturally appear above. Much better. Alright, let's play around with physics for a bit. Since our ball is a rigid body 2D, we move it by applying forces to it. By looking through the documentation, apply impulse appears to be the right method for our needs. It's meant for simulating one-time impacts, which is perfect for simulating a golf club hitting a golf ball. Let's apply an impulse to the ball. I chose the value 200 arbitrarily. Notice that I'm doing this in the ready method. This is for experimentation purposes. Once we're happy with it, we'll implement physics properly. Let's see this in action. Well, that doesn't look right. Let's tweak a few more properties. Under the ball's rigid body properties, we can add a new physics material. Here, we set the bounce value to 1. Let's preview the change. The initial bounce looks a lot more convincing. However, the angle diminishes with each subsequent bounce and the ball doesn't stop moving. Let's try changing some more properties. I'll try setting the linear damp property to 1. The damp property simply helps reduce the body's movement over time. This looks much better. Let's combine mouse inputs and physics. First off, we're going to want a max intensity for each putt. Let's modify the draw method to communicate to the player when they've reached maximum power. Before drawing the line, we check the distance between the ball and the cursor. If the distance exceeds 100 units, we cap it. The result looks like this. As an additional quality of life change, we can change the color of the line based on the length. This would give the player a rough idea of how powerful the shot would be. And this is what it looks like. Okay, now let's apply the impulse when we release the mouse button. I'll make a method for it here on the bottom. We only want to run it if we have a valid position. Notice that this is the call to apply impulse that I had in the ready method from earlier. And I'll invoke it in the input handler when we detect that the left mouse button has been raised. Now let's see this in action. As you can see, if I draw a line and release, the ball gets launched. And if I just click in place, nothing happens. Obviously, because I hard-coded the force values to 200 by 200, the ball will only ever get launched towards the bottom left. So let's sort that out now. In order to accomplish this, we get the distance between the ball and the mouse, just like we do when we draw the line. We clamp the value between 0 and 100. To get the x and y force values, I simply subtract the cursor's position from the ball's position. Then I multiply by 2, because I like the number 200. It works well for now. Let's have a look. There it is. The ball moves in the direction we specify with the mouse. However, notice that we can move the ball even while it's still rolling. We don't want this. Let's fix it now. I'll start by adding a script to the ball. On top, I'll define a movement threshold constant. And on the bottom, I'll add a method to check if the ball is moving. Notice that I'm checking if the ball's linear velocity is above the threshold. Due to the nature of the physics engine, the linear velocity will never truly be 0, even if the ball is stationary. I chose the value of 1.2 for my threshold because, in testing, I found that a stationary ball can have a linear velocity of as high as 1.16. You'll see this shortly. There's one last change we need to make. Let's only move the ball if it's not already moving. Now let's try it out. Notice how I can't hit the ball while it's moving anymore. I also added a debug statement to show what the ball's actual linear velocity is when I release the mouse. Notice that it can be as high as 1.16, even when the ball is visibly standing still. This is just a quirk of the physics engine that we have to work around, but I think I'm happy with the current results.
That's it for this update. You may have noticed this was more of a tutorial style video. That's because we've changed our approach to recording video footage. Now, we record the footage while we're developing the game or creating assets, as opposed to doing it at the end of the week just before the video is due, which would often result in effectively recreating the game. It's a lot more work, but we believe it makes a way better video for the viewer, so we hope you enjoyed it. So what can you expect in the next episode? Some basic and intermediate levels, additional obstacles, maybe even dynamic ones such as windmill blades, and some camera navigation features like panning and zooming for larger levels. If you want to keep up with development, go ahead and subscribe. You can also check out the link playlist in the description for the whole series, or even follow us on our various social media platforms, shown on the screen now. We post regularly everywhere. We hope you found this video helpful or entertaining. See you next week.